Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to film a video about my presidential reading challenge. And I apologize for not getting back to this for such a long time, but you know, that's just the way it goes sometimes. So today we're going to be talking about the books that I read for Presidents 6 through 10. I am going through all of the books that I've read so far for the presidential reading challenge, and I'm breaking it up into 5 presidents at a time just to try to keep the video length manageable, and to offer you guys some suggestions for potential reads for the presidential reading challenge if you're interested. So to recap, the presidential reading challenge is simply reading a biography of each American president in chronological order. I am currently up to Truman. That's the next president I have to read, but I'm going back and doing a sort of a walkthrough of the presidential biographies that I read previously through the course of this project, which has been ongoing for me since about 2012. So the books that I'm going to talk about today, I read between 2013 and 2015. So I typically read 2 to 3 presidents per year. This isn't the only thing that I read, so I try to space them out. And these ones, yeah, that was the time period, the end of 2012 and the beginning of 2015, in between those 2 dates. I read these 5 presidents, so let's get into it. The first president we're going to talk about is John Quincy Adams, who happens to be the favorite of mine in the best discovery that I've made in the course of this presidential reading challenge. I just think John Quincy Adams is the most fascinating person. This is the original biography that I read. This is John Quincy Adams by Harlow, Giles, Unger. This was first published in 2012, and Unger wrote biographies of at least 6 of the founding father presidents. Yeah, 6 biographies of Americans' founding fathers. So this is one of those because John Quincy Adams is considered sort of the last of the people from that era. He was not a founding father himself, but he was the only son of a founding father to become president. So John Quincy Adams had a life of public service from a very young age. When he was just a teenager, his father took him overseas and he became the ambassador to Russia at 17 or 18 years old. He was just an incredible statesman. He traveled around the world. He was very cosmopolitan. And he served as president for only 1 term, but then came back afterwards as a congressman. I can't remember if he was a congressman and a senator, but he was various political roles during the course of his life, and he remained in office until his death in his 80s. And he was just an incredible person. So this book is his biography of his entire life. I really enjoyed this one very much. And then I also read Mr. Adams's Last Crusade, John Quincy Adams' Extraordinary Post-Presidential Life in Congress by Joseph Wheelan. And this book, let's see what date this one was published. This one came out in 2008, and this covers his post-presidential career, so all of his time in Congress after he was president, and he was the leader in the anti-slavery movement in Congress. He was a vocal opponent of slavery later in his life, and he was not afraid to challenge the powers that be in Congress at that time. He was just well known for his thundering speeches in the Congress. And so this book details all of those efforts in his post-presidential life. Also super interesting. So I would highly recommend both of those books for you for presidential biographies for John Quincy Adams. And please read about John Quincy Adams. He was just so fascinating, and I'm so glad that I read about him and learned more about him. That he was our 6th president. So 7th president, Andrew Jackson. The Life of Andrew Jackson by Robert Remini. This was published in 1988, and it is a, what's the word I want? This brought together Remini's 3-volume biography of Andrew Jackson. He wrote 3 separate volumes detailing Andrew Jackson's life, and then after those were published, he took and condensed them down into this 1 volume. So this is the one I read, and this is the book that shocked me the most, and also made me understand that everything old is new again in terms of American politics, that all of the shenanigans that politicians, particularly presidential politicians, get up to in America, you know, they have some some correlation with things that happened in the past. And in particular, there are a lot of parallels between Andrew Jackson and Donald Trump in terms of their management style and their governing style, I would say. Andrew Jackson, was the person who was in charge during many embarrassing moments of American history, very shameful moments of American history, including the Trail of Tears. That's probably the most shameful thing that he was the instrument of. But he also was the type of person that would just get in fistfights in the street. So, he had personal aggressive tendencies as well as aggressive tendencies as a politician. So this book, though, Andrew Jackson, while reprehensible in a lot of ways, was also an extremely interesting character. He was the first sort of populist American president, the first president to appeal to the masses and to speak directly to the people, and try to draw a distinction between the life of ordinary Americans and the life of politicians. So this is the book that I read for Andrew Jackson, and I can recommend that one. Now, the next couple of presidents are ones that I have less memory of in terms of their ability to stick in my brain. Of course, it has been over a decade since I read these, and these next two presidents I did read in the American Presidents series, which are these little slim biographies, less than 200 pages. So President number 7, Martin Van Buren by Ted Widmer. This book came out in 2005, I believe. I did look at this before I started reading. Yeah, 2005. Here's a picture of Martin Van Buren. He was quite, those are some mutton chops right there. He was the first American president who, his native tongue was Dutch. He came from a Dutch community in New York, I believe. And it was the first sort of ethnic president that we ever had. And he was like the polar opposite of Andrew Jackson, which is probably why he was elected. But he also only served one term. So there's not much that I can say about him other than, I think his Dutch connection is the most interesting thing about him from what I can remember. These little American president biographies, though, are really great, particularly if you're not a person who enjoys, a 600 or 700 or 800 page biography. Like, these are probably more your style. And these get really to the heart of the matter and really show, the central themes of each of the presidents' terms in office and also their lives. I mean, you don't get a lot of extraneous detail. You don't get a lot of detail about their family lives or anything like that, but you do get a good picture of the person's life in general and of their presidency. So I can recommend them for that. He just has not stuck in my mind very much. So that's all I have to say about Martin Van Buren, president number 7. President number 8, this poor guy, William Henry Harrison. So William Henry Harrison was only president for 30 days. He lasted less than a month. He got sick and died in office. First president to die in office. He is credited with the first presidential campaign where he actually went out and met the public. He had a slogan, Tippecanoe and Tyler too. He was promoted as this great war hero, that he was this big Indian fighter, and that was what he ran on, which was that he had been born in this log cabin and came from a very rural and poor upbringing. None of that was true. I mean, he had been a soldier, but he hadn't been particularly, he hadn't won a bunch of, he hadn't done anything really spectacular. He did not come from a poor family. He came from a very, comfortable upper middle class family. It was all just PR to get him elected. And I think what probably got him elected was the fact that they used to give out alcohol at his political rallies, his political campaign events. They would hand out shots of whiskey, and, that probably influenced a lot of people to vote for him. But regardless, he only was alive for a month after he became president. So I believe he holds the record for shortest term for American president. First president to die in office. really not much else to say about poor old William Henry Harrison. This was written by Gail Collins, though, and I did want to mention that because there's so few American president biographies that are written by women. So it's always exciting when you find one written by a woman. And what is Gail Collins? In her regular life, she is an op-ed columnist for the New York Times, and she wrote a couple of quite interesting books. She's the author of When Everything Changed: The Amazing Journey of American Women from 1960 to the Present. And to the present, excuse me, and then America's Women, 400 Years of Dolls, Drudges, Helpmates, and Heroines. Those all sound really interesting, so I might look up some of her other work, but this is the book that I read for William Henry Harrison. And I will say, he is one of the presidents. It's very difficult to find books to read about him because he had such a short life and short presidency. And then finally, so we've done Presidents 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. No, 6, 7, 8, 9, and this will be 10 because I read 2 books for John Quincy Adams. So this is John Tyler, The Accidental President by Edward P. Crapol, and this was published in 2006. Originally, this was the reissued edition in 2012. Not only was John Tyler a traitor to our country, he was also extremely boring to read about. I'm sorry to say, this was not a very interesting biography. I would say if there is another biography out there that you think might be more interesting, probably check it out, because this one was quite dry. Not only was it dry, but the type is super small. I mean, you might be able to get a different edition, but this edition, it was brutal. It was brutal. So John Tyler he was the first person to become president because he was vice president when the president died in office. So he was always called the accidental president. And he was also like a serious states' right person. He was very supportive of states' rights. He also was very supportive of slavery. He was all in for slavery. He was all in for territorial expansion in order to support slavery. And after his presidential career was over, he joined with his fellow Southern states to support the Confederacy. He became a Confederate, an officer in the Confederate, an official in the Confederate government. So not great to be known as the one American president who supported another government over the U.S. government. That's not a good look, John Tyler. So yeah, he was certainly not somebody to emulate, certainly not somebody to look up to. But if you're interested in sort of the pre-Civil War era, and I just recently read the new Eric Larson book, which is about the battle for Fort Sumter, and John Tyler was still president when all the lead up to all that. He wasn't the president when the actual battle occurred, but the lead up to all of that, he was still president, and Larson just takes him to task for being so ineffective as president and not doing anything to stop the role of the country towards the Civil War. So yeah, not great. Not a great look, John Tyler, but this is the biography that I did read for John Tyler, not that I can recommend it. So that takes us through Presidents 6 through 10, and the books that I read to complete the presidential challenge for those presidents. I hope you find that interesting. I hope that's useful to you. Let me know in the comments down below if you've read any biographies for any of these presidents that you would recommend more than the ones that I read. And I hope you all have a great day and find some good books to read.